Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Curriculum Oversight Matters, Understanding Southern Poverty Law Center's Learning for Justice Curriculum Program with Paul Runko for Defending Education. I am Dr. Tracy Frederick, the Executive Director of the Kansas School Board Resource Center, and Ward Cassidy, the KSBRC Senior Advisor, is also here with us. And I'm also very excited to announce that our new policy lead expert, Mark Woofter, former superintendent for Cheney School District, is in our audience today. You'll hear more about him in the coming weeks and about the exciting district leadership initiatives that he will be launching soon. But for those of you who are not as familiar with Kansas School Board Resource Center, some of you are coming from us from afar all over the nation. We want you to know that our singular mission is to help school board members be effective advocates for students to focus on improving academic outcomes. So a couple of housekeeping items before we dive into our webinar and I give a little bit more of an introduction. We understand there may be a lot of questions for clarification purposes, and Mr. Runko will be able to answer all of those background issues in his presentation, but also you may have some other questions. So for efficiency's sake, we ask that you type those questions into your Q&A box, and I'll ask them at the appropriate time. If you don't see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, there's a circle with three dots. If you click on that, you'll see a Q&A box there, and I'll monitor that throughout Mr. Runko's presentation. So also this presentation is recorded, so you'll receive a link to the recording to review and to share also. And as always, I'll send you directly a link to the recording if you're registered here, and you can share that. It will be also archived on our video section of the KSBRC webpage. Now, I want you to know that we bring this topic to you. We were approached by an organization that brought to our attention that the SPLC curriculum was being used in several districts in Kansas and part of faculty development programs in school districts, often without the school board member or perhaps even district leadership being aware of the program and what it advocates for. Mr. Runko is a senior director of the K through 12 initiatives at Defending Education and leads their national efforts to support parents and concerned citizens in advancing academic excellence and political party neutral reforms in our schools. Mr. Runko is an advocate for curriculum transparency, parental rights, and ensuring civil rights. So we thank you for presenting information today, Mr. Runko, for districts in full transparency so those district leaders and school board members can make an informed decision about what's best for their students and teachers and for their schools. And so I know you have a lot to cover. I don't want to interrupt you or take too much of your time, so I would just turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks so much, Tracy. Thank you, Ward, for having me today. Good morning to everybody who's joining Kansas or wherever you are in the country. Really happy to be here. Like Tracy said, my name is Paul Runko. I'm the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives and K-12 Programs at an organization called Defending Education. And again, if you've never heard about us, we're about 5 years old, a little over 5 years old. We started right after the COVID pandemic when parents started to see all of the interesting and arguably crazy things that their children were learning over Zoom school, and when parents started to rise up and demand that schools remove the political ideologies and return to academic excellence across the country in K-12 public schools. And so we're an organization of parents, grandparents, concerned citizens working to reform schools back to academic excellence and political neutrality. And so really excited to talk to you today about one of our recent reports around the Southern Poverty Law Center and their Learning for Justice curriculum. However, I do want to say that we at Defending Education find these types of curriculums all of the time. And so I want this presentation to be less about a specific curriculum and more about this idea of curriculum oversight and educational material oversight for school boards and for advocates, because these types of curriculums that have an ideological bend pop up all the time. And so you can kind of use the same playbook or set yourself up for success no matter what is being promoted in your schools. So I'll start with a question before we dive into any of the material. And it's just a sort of an open question you can think about as we go through some of these slides here. The question is, how many instructional resources used in a school district are formally adopted by the school board? And how many of them arrive through professional development, consultants, SEL, social emotional learning programs, other websites, or teacher-created lessons? So again, this idea of how much does the school board and the elected officials that oversee the schools for the public actually approve of what's being shown to teachers and to students? I think when a lot of school boards and even parents and other education advocates think of curriculum oversight, they think about the textbook, right? You know, what's in the textbook? Everybody wants the textbook posted on the school's website where everybody can see, and that's great. We would agree with that. But it goes further than that. And this case study into the Southern Poverty Law Center's Learning for Justice curriculum, I think is a great case study for this. And so parents are seeing things that their students are taking home from school or being taught in class that are not part of the approved curriculum. They're either a supplemental resource, they were part of a professional development that either a staff member or a teacher had. They're part of an equity or a DEI initiative at the school. They're part of a social emotional learning program. They're part of a teacher training or some sort of other online supplemental material that was given to the student. And so we recently did a report, Defending Education. My organization did an investigative report on the Southern Poverty Law Center's Learning for Justice curriculum. And again, it provides a useful case study of those challenges. And so why the Southern Poverty Law Center? Well, well, I guess we should start with what is the Southern Poverty Law Center? Who is the Southern Poverty Law Center? So the Southern Poverty Law Center has been around for decades. They're I guess like sort of a public interest law firm slash issue advocacy group. But like most institutions that we see in education, they've become very highly ideological, and a lot of their materials, if not all of their materials, skew towards a particular political bend. The Southern Poverty Law Center has been pretty famous in the last few years because of what they have on their website, which is, well, here's the report. So if you're interested in finding the report in full, you can go to defendinged.org. I'm sure we'll post a link in the chat or in follow-up materials soon. But here's that report that I mentioned earlier. But the Southern Poverty Law Center became famous because of this hate map that they have. And I hope you all can see this on the screen. This is essentially a map of groups that they deem hateful and that I guess are discriminatory and do bad things for our country. And so this became famous because a lot of the groups that were organizing in response to COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement back in 2020 were put on this list. So parents speaking up at school board meetings, just trying to get their schools to open or remove masks from their kids or stop teaching critical race theory, they were put on this map. And so full disclosure, we're also on their hate map, our organization Defending Education. But that's not why we looked into this organization and their curriculum. The reason we did was because the Southern Poverty Law Center made the news because they're under investigation by the Department of Justice um, for a few alleged things that they're looking into. And so they were making the news. And I think parents and school board members and teachers were saying, oh, this is, maybe something going on in California or New York, but it's not happening here. And that's when we always know to look into something at Defending Education. Is this a pervasive thing? Is this something that's happening everywhere, or is it isolated and parents can kind of not worry about it? And so, as I showed before, our report tracks this in 43 states, 30 government entities, and 225 school districts. So this was a pervasive curriculum, what we were seeing. But this hate map essentially compares parent groups and parents fighting back at school board meetings to groups like the KKK. And so obviously very controversial there. In addition to this, they have their curriculum, educational materials, which is called Learning for Justice. It was formerly called Teaching Tolerance. I think they changed the name 2 or 3 years ago. So you might see it said both ways, or if you're looking back in time, like we did in the report, a lot of it's called Teaching Tolerance. Uh, but here's sort of the definition they give it, and I just wanted to read it to you and have it put it up on the screen just so you all could read it. So, as according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, Learning for Justice is a community education program of the Southern Poverty Law Center that cultivates and nurtures dialogue, learning, reflection, and civic action from those closest to and harmed most by injustices in the South. Okay, well, that doesn't really sound too bad. Um, here's the sort of the next thing we found about how they themselves describe this program. It focuses on, quote, education for liberation, community civic and political action education. Learning for Justice complements the Southern Poverty Law Center's work to increase power and capacity for multiracial, inclusive democracy. A lot of buzzwords going on in there. And so we'll walk through a few specifics of maybe what some of these things mean. But for our parents and our concerned citizens that we work with, some of these words like political action, you know, racial inclusiveness always raises red flags because those are the same words that people who push things like critical race theory are typically trying to describe their initiatives as. And so this Learning for Justice, they provide classroom lessons, they provide professional development, what they call social justice standards, educator resources, and family engagement materials. And so, why this matters and why you should care? Okay, so what if this private nonprofit is putting out a curriculum about some politically charged things on one side of the political spectrum? Why should you all care, especially in a state like Kansas? Well, through our report, again, we found this being adapted and implemented in school districts, state education guidance, teacher prep programs, professional associations are working with the Southern Poverty Law Center with these materials, and also social emotional learning lessons, as well as consultants recommending this program after they audit the school district for whatever purpose. And so again, this is 43 states plus Washington, D.C., 30 state government entities, and 225 school districts were really just what we could find in about a month's time. I'm sure this is more pervasive, especially if you go back in time, maybe a little bit further. Our report really just scratches the surface. But again, we wanted to alert parents that, this entity and this program isn't just it's something the federal government is looking into. I don't really have to worry about it, or this is not in my area. No, parents and school board members across the country really need to be looking not only into this, but also safeguarding themselves if this is something they realize we don't want for our school district. How do we make sure this is not something that gets approved or implemented in classrooms without supervision? So I want to give you some examples now from the report, just to, don't take my word for it. Here's some of the things that we found and that the Southern Poverty Law Center puts out in general. And so, like I said, the content often pushes a far left cultural and political ideology, such as activism for specific causes, anti-racism, Black Lives Matter, gender ideology, queer theory, white privilege, white supremacy, whiteness, transgenderism. So all things that we would argue students don't need to be learning about in K-12 schools. And even if they are, making sure that they're presented at least a two-sided view of these issues in school. And so here's their Teaching Tolerance magazine issue from spring 2021. White supremacy in education, you could see is sort of the title of this. White supremacy affects every element of the U.S. education system. I personally would not agree with that. I'm sure many of you may not agree with that. But this is sort of the view of this organization and these materials. You could see Up at the top, social justice and math. I'm not sure what social justice and math have to do with one another, but I'm sure they have some suggestions for everybody. Black male educators resisting white supremacy with joy. Again, just this focus on race and uh, you know just prepping educators and people who use these materials with this sort of us versus them mentality and painting a particular race of people as bad or oppressive. This next slide we have a equity audit. So again, if we have any school board members or parents that are aware of their school district that, especially in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020, a lot of school districts did equity audits to make sure that essentially their school was not racist. And I've yet to find an equity audit that said the school district wasn't racist. They're always racist for some reason. But in their recommendations for this school district, you can see here circled, it says adopt Learning for Justice's social justice standards. And so many times when a school district gets a report back from a consultant that says you should do this to improve, they usually do it. And so this, in this particular case, it was recommended that they adopt these standards. And so what are these standards, right? Okay, social justice standards don't sound too bad. Most faiths, I think, believe in social justice as a concept. And so let's take a deeper look. In the social justice standards of the Southern Poverty Law Center's Learning for Justice, there's a bunch of different categories, but one of them is the action pillars. And I just want to highlight a couple of these that you see here on the screen. The second to last one, Action 19, says, I stand up to exclusion, prejudice, and discrimination, even when it's not popular or easy when no one else does. Okay, that sounds nice. I mean, I kind of want everybody to do that too. I think everybody should do that. Unfortunately, the way this manifests itself sometimes in schools is if a student, let's say, uses the biologically correct pronouns of another student, that's considered discriminatory, and so students should stand up to that. Um, Another example sometimes is when a student says, I don't believe in white privilege, I don't believe that all white people are oppressors. That could be exclusionary or discrimination. So the student should stand up to somebody who doesn't believe, this view of, critical race theory, essentially. And so that's kind of the problem with some of these things. Also, the last one you'll see, Action 20, I will join diverse people to plan and carry out collective action against exclusion, prejudice, and discrimination, and we will be thoughtful and creative in our actions in order to achieve our goals. This one, collective action uh, starts to raise red flags with our parents that are part of our organization. Um, Again, this kind of sounds nice, but a lot of the ways that these manifest itself is, okay, what are we going to do? What action are we going to take to right wrongs in our society? Earlier this year, we saw hundreds of students walk out of high schools to protest ICE and immigration enforcement. And so that would be, I think, to these standards, an acceptable outcome, which I would argue, our organization would argue, and a lot of parents across the country would argue, not only should this not be taught in school, but it shouldn't be encouraged either. Another example I want to give you, this is in 2022, the New York State Education Department, so this is a state education entity, added equity revisions to its social, emotional, and learning benchmarks, which you can see here. It aligned their benchmarks to Learning for Justice's social justice standards. So essentially, whatever these social justice standards said about race and gender and these political activism, students should be learning that and being assessed on that in New York State. So I want to pause here for a second and just again think about how this relates to the title of this presentation, which is curriculum oversight. And so I think it's fair to debate, okay, should students be learning this? Should they not be learning this? Should this be a part of how schools are assessed, should it not be? I think that there's fair discussion there. But I think that you know, what we're not debating here is okay, should students be learning about civil rights? Should they be learning about historical injustices like slavery? Should they be learning about respect for others? I think we would all probably agree that students should be learning about that. The debate is really whether this type of political activism, this encouragement of political activism, especially political activism for a particular ideological worldview, should be incorporated into schools and be set as educational objectives. And so, especially for the school board members and the parents and the advocates that are on this call, I want you to think about where should your school be drawing the line between, let's say, civic education, social studies, history education, and this idea of civic activism, which is very prevalent in this Learning for Justice curriculum. I want to get into a couple of other ways that this curriculum and others make it into, the classroom and into teacher and how this just gets into the school system in general. I already discussed these, but again, teacher professional development, equity audits, which I showed, consultant recommendations, social emotional learning implementation, teacher crafted lessons, family resource pages, and state guidance documents. This is all documented in our report if you want to see specific examples of these, but I'll present another few just so you can see what we're talking about. So this is uh, I guess, a material from a company called Second Step. And if you're not familiar with Second Step is a very popular social emotional learning program that schools will implement um, in their school districts. And so, the idea is if you don't have SEL in your school yet, which it's in, I want to say most schools now, they have some component of SEL. Social emotional learning is really meant to help students and really just the school climate in general combat the mental health crisis, especially in the wake of COVID. The idea is that if students are in a healthy place mentally, they'll be able to learn, do math, reading, writing, history, science, which we would agree with as well. Unfortunately, a lot of these approaches and these programs that school districts implement, usually for top dollar, incorporate things like the Southern Poverty Law Center's Learning for Justice. And so here you can see an example of how Second Step has aligned their lessons with Learning for Justice. And here's just another example from them. You can see they're talking about Black Lives Matter and how that movement is probably great and there's no downsides to it. And then they also reference teaching tolerance as a resource for addressing racism, which everybody should check out. And so this could be and might be in some of the social emotional learning programs that are in some of the school districts that you operate in. There's also professional associations that partner with the Southern Poverty Law Center on their work. And so here's the American School Counselors Association listing Learning for Justice as something that's used in their programming. So we're talking about school counselors using this material to form their membership, which if the school counselors are using this, it doesn't just like, okay, we're not going to use this in the schools that that they operate in. So it obviously influences the staff, the teachers, and then the students as well. I didn't put a specific example of this, but the teachers' unions are also pretty heavily mentioned in our report on defendinged.org. So just again, another way that professional associations and unions are using this material and saying, educators, staff, school board members, here's something worthwhile that you should be incorporating into your schools. And we would argue that these materials are highly ideological and do not produce academically excellent and free thinking students. Um, so again, going back to this idea of oversight and how this would get into the school, even when a board never formally adopts these standards, these curriculums, these lessons, district employees might reference them in a class setting. Consultants will recommend them. Teachers will use them, especially if they, get an email from their union saying, "Hey, use this in your classrooms as you feel fit." And then family resources may link to them. And this is where I want to transition to a couple of Kansas specific examples that showed it up in our report. I'm always like kind of surprised when I see, a state like Kansas or potentially Florida or Arkansas show up in these reports. Because I think a lot of parents that we work with say, "Oh, I'm in this red state. We have a supermajority Republican, whatever, and I'm safe from things that I don't necessarily want my kid learning." And unfortunately, we usually find stuff in some way, shape, or form that at least parents should be looking into further. And so here's a couple of examples from Kansas. Again, not to scare anybody or anything, but just to give you an examples of how these materials show up in schools. So here's Lawrence Public Schools. It has a program called Parents as Teachers, and it has an anti-racist parenting resource page. And you can see some of the things here that are mentioned, anti-racist parenting materials, equity resources. But here on the right, you'll see teaching tolerance. Again, now it's called Learning for Justice, but it's the same program. Um, and so this is recommended to parents and really anybody who's looking on the school website as something that's worthwhile to use as an educational material. It says our mission is to help teachers in schools educate children and youth to be active participants in a diverse democracy. Okay, that kind of sounds nice. But then kind of when you drill down into it, you see, oh, they're pushing a particular ideology on students. Black Lives Matter you see here. And so again, like we can debate whether these things should be on the school website, and I think that's a worthwhile conversation. But I also think it's worth asking questions like, who approved this page? Is there a review process that went into this before this was posted? Was the school board aware that this is even on the, school district website? How are these resources vetted? Like who gets to decide that teaching tolerance or the Zinn education project, which is also a very questionable curriculum in our opinion? How do these get on this and who vets these resources? And what rubric do you have for inclusion? So what standards determine whether something gets on this page or not? And sometimes the answer is very clear, like, oh, went through these steps, and this is how it got on here, and this is the multi-level layers of supervision and oversight that happen. But I think a lot of the times it's just maybe the principal or the superintendent saying, "Hey, slap this on the website. This came in an email from our union, or this was posted by the American Counselors Association, so we should put it on there." And so, school boards and education advocates and stakeholders should know at least, the oversight process for these things. Um, I'll go to the next one here. This is it Olath or Lathi schools school district here in Kansas, and this was
Sorry,
a
it's Olathe.
Olathe. Thanks, sir. Thank you. That
No
one.
problem.
I knew I was going to mess that up, no matter how many times I practiced it beforehand. But anyway, so this was a part of a presentation that was given to the Board of Education about diversity inclusion back in 2020, so 6 years ago now. Again, after sort of the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the riots and stuff that happened in the summer of 2020. So it's understandable that there was a focus on these materials during that time, although we would argue that they're misguided. But anyway, so this presentation, you can see the third thing is a teaching tolerance training with ONEA. So 80 staff, you see 80 staff members participated in a training hosted by the teachers union in this school district on Southern Poverty Law Center's teaching tolerance. Now it's called uh, you know Learning for Justice. And so critical conversations you see in there, that usually means, oh, we're presenting this like oppressor versus oppressed, you know, worldview and how it should be incorporated into the classroom and into schools. Their common beliefs and biases. So a lot of these trainings would say, oh, because you're a particular skin color or because you're a Christian or a male, you have, you know, internal biases that you're not even aware of, that you're racist without knowing it or something, which has been completely debunked, by the way, that, there's tons of science out there that says it's not true. Um, but again, this was the questions I think that school board members and advocates and concerned citizens should be asking themselves is maybe not necessarily on the merits of this program in particular, but was this a required training or was it simply volunteer? How is success measured in these trainings? I think when parents think teacher trainings or staff trainings, they're like, oh, it must make our schools, academically excellent, or maybe it provides more efficiency or something like that. And so, how was success measured for these programs? Hopefully, it was not something like, oh, every staff member that attended made an anti-racist pledge and decided to be a Black Lives Matter member or something like that. Um, but just how is success measured of these things? Were parents informed of this? I mean, as a parent, I would want to know if my teachers are taking this training and what the materials that were presented to the staff members that interact with my students. And so were parents informed? And then what role did the school board play? Was this a training specifically approved? Um, or was it part of a, larger discretional fund? Or was it part of a collective bargaining agreement, maybe with the union? Um, I think these are important questions to ask as we think about not just this curriculum in this program, but also how boards and community members can have oversight over these things. And so, as I wrap up here, I do want to give you some thought starters again to this idea of not necessarily like, this is a bad curriculum. I need to look out for this in my school district. I need to do a witch hunt on this particular program. It's not really about that per se. It's just this idea again of curriculum oversight. And so, I'll give you four how might we statements that you can either bring back to your board or bring back to your community and say, um, we want to have intentional, transparent conversations about these educational materials, no matter what they are. They don't have to be ideologically left. They could be ideological right. It could be very neutral academic materials. But how might we require greater transparency on external curriculum providers, professional development vendors, equity consultants, or just consultants in general, and supplemental resources that are brung into the classroom or in front of teachers and faculty? How might we establish review procedures for things like those family or educator resources pages that I showed from Lawrence schools? How do we establish review procedures for classroom supplementary materials? And then how do we establish review procedures for things like district recommended websites? So almost every single school district website I've ever looked at has usually like here's links to all these external organizations and pages we think are really great. Um, how do we have review procedures for those pages? Maybe it's annually, maybe it's every 4 years, maybe it's as needed, but I think it's important to think of should there and could there be a review procedure in place? How might we clearly define the distinction between civic education and political activism? So again, I talked about this idea of, um, you know, part of what this Learning for Justice program tries to solve is, civic education. I think especially in the 250th year of America, schools are saying, how do we get our kids and our students thinking about our country and how to make it better, which I think is totally appropriate. Um, but when do we cross the line on, making sure our students understand the history of America, our Republican form of government, the ideals and values that our country is founded upon? And when do we go into, okay, we need to advocate for specific political solutions, and helping or instructing students in which political solutions are the correct or incorrect ones. So how might we clearly define what is which and which to include and which not to include? And the last one is, how might we ensure board members can answer the question, what is being taught, who created it, and how did it get here? I hate surprises, and I hate when somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, how did this end up being?" Or, why was this like this? And I don't have an answer. It feels really uncomfortable. And I know that our parents are going to school board meetings and saying, I found this very controversial lesson being taught to my kids. How did this happen? And just my gut instinct is a lot of school board members, the answer is, I don't know. And so we at Defending Education would love to help you all, no matter what your role in education, make sure that you understand or at least know how to get an answer to these types of questions um, when you get them. And so, how do you, as board members or other education stakeholders, answer these questions when they come up? So again, that's all I have in terms of a presentation. I'll leave these how might we statements on the screen for a couple more minutes, but again, this presentation, hopefully you come away with this thinking this is not necessarily about one particular organization or curriculum, although I would encourage you to read our report on defendinged.org. We'll drop a link in the chat here in a second to get you a direct link to that. Read the report, see everything that we've reported on, because it is interesting. And I think you should look into whether this is being used in any way, shape, or form in your school district. However, this is mostly about governance. School boards, are elected by their community and are entrusted by their community to oversee what the students are learning in schools. And they're responsible for ensuring transparency, accountability, and trust in the curriculum and instructional materials. And so, again, I'll just leave you with the question: Do board members and parents know what is influencing curriculum, and is there a clear process for oversight? So with that,
Thank you.
Tracy, I'll hand it back to you.
Well, thanks. Thanks so much, Mr. Runko, for giving us that really great insight. Ward, did you want to kick us off with some questions? I do have one, but I didn't know if you had something you'd like to answer, but you're on mute. So, yep, you're still on mute. Try one more time. There you are. Oh, we're back on mute again. Just one moment. Let me see if I can.
We're done.
There
Paul,
you
that
are.
was great. Thank you very much for your presentation. I've been around this business for a long time. And, I just have to add, at one time, my favorite time of the year was when textbook companies would come through the school and we could review these wonderful texts and the teachers would look at them and there was nothing political involved. It was just what was the best teacher supplements. And, it was a much easier process than it is right now. But the conversations I've had in the last 5 years have been unbelievable. Uh, just what you've talked about, and I'm not going to get into the politics of any of this, but yesterday I had a phone call from a superintendent. They have a social studies teacher that is a great guy, and they found out at the end of the year he was teaching using all these supplements on his own uh, that the community didn't want to hear. But it took a year for anybody to even speak up. And that was unusual. And I talked to the young man, and his comment was, "It's what I was taught in college." And, I think we're hearing more and more of that. So not only superintendents have to be, maybe that's what you want. I know superintendents that's exactly what they want. They want to indoctrinate. But parent rights become so important, and parents need to find a way to be involved in this process. And just the things that you emulated or what parents need to do, even if you're in an entirely district that is going the other way, you still have the right to go to a board meeting and ask the questions that you're asking, and at least make people aware. And I think that's why the growth of homeschooling and private schools is going, because if you're in that district and you can't get anything done, you leave the district. And I feel sorry for that whole process, but board members really should be aware. Where we run into a problem is when you have a board that wants all of this stuff. And that's what makes parents' jobs so difficult. And, the questions I get, what can I do as a parent? And you gave us some answers. So uh, I stay aware is what I'm going to say to every parent, every school board member. And it's not going away. It's out there. It's out there every day. And we just need to make sure that we're doing the best we can for our kids. And it's apparently in most, like Kansas, our test results are horrible. Why? Find out. So anyhow, I'll get off the soapbox. Great job. Thank you for making us aware.
Thanks, Ward. Yeah, one thing I'd add to your advice for parents is we really encourage parents to get organized. And we have resources on our website, defendinged.org, about how parents can get together with like-minded parents because not only is it great to know, oh, there's other parents in my community, in my school district that are having these same types of challenges, but many hands make light work. And so even just five people showing up at a school board meeting saying the same message has a huge impact over just maybe one parent. And so if anybody on the call or knows a parent who is concerned about something going on in their school district and wants to find other parents in their area, we're happy to help there too.
Thanks so much. You're exactly right. And I think one of the things that whether you even have an objection about curriculum or something that your child, your grandchild, niece, nephew, whomever is being taught, it's never a bad idea just to go and ask some of those questions and make sure that there's some kind of vetting process. And because every school board member is to represent their constituents, to represent their community, not their own personal agenda. And so just being able to know that, it's really a good way to be informed about that. I know that has not started recently, even as a mom. About 20 years ago, I learned of some things in my daughter's school and started asking some questions and learned some pretty disturbing things at that time as well. So it's been going on for quite some time. And so it's in many ways, as I just tried to make the point, it has permeated. And for some of us, it's become just the norm. It's something we don't even notice, which is what you talked about, Paul, in your presentation.
Yeah, and I also think it's worthwhile to mention that there's a lot of teachers that are required to use these materials or attend these teacher trainings that don't want to do this either. And so I do think that sometimes teachers are demonized
Mhm.
generally as a population. And I think it's important to note that there's teachers too that are quietly suffering through a lot of these materials that don't want to be doing it in schools either.
Oh, you make an excellent point. I know of quite a few teachers who are trying to find some way to circumvent that in their classrooms. We do have a question, and then I have a couple of other questions as well. You mentioned the allegations the SPLC is facing that they funded the very organizations that they later protested against. In your research, have you found any state education reform organizations that have also received similar funding from SPLC?
I don't think that was a part of any of our investigations into this particular program or organization. We really want to focus on like what's actually in classrooms and in the schools and trying to prevent, essentially indoctrination of students towards a particular worldview or political ideology. And so I personally, know about the, investigations and everything that's happening with them and how that's all played out. Um, but that's something we can certainly look into, and I think it is worthwhile to see. But there's a lot of collaboration, between just entities, like I said, using these materials. And, there's a lot of collaboration between the teachers unions and the Southern Poverty Law Center. These materials also show up in college classrooms, like you mentioned, Ward, these learning for justice standards are in colleges of education too. So the teachers are being taught this stuff way before they go into the classrooms. And so you as a school board can say, this will never come into our school, but the teachers have already marinated it for 4 years in college. And so there's really nothing you can do to prevent that. And so it's unfortunately like whack-a-mole sometimes, doing this education reform work. But I think it's a great question. I definitely think it's something, our organization and the movement at large should look into.
Well, and I think that you brought up something that's very important, and that is starting this conversation. I mean, anytime there's a conversation that's going on and in between school boards, parents, teachers, administrators, there's going to be, hopefully, there will be at some point the opportunity for people to kind of come together and to be able to, um, think proactively about students and really, come together on the same page, or those that are not will, you know, learn that this is probably not the place for me, or maybe this is not, what is appropriate for my children. You mentioned non-political, nonpartisan throughout. There are some out there who will say that that is actually not the case, that in presenting another side or just, removing that any of this information is really a political maneuver. How do you answer that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's a something we hear all the time. And what I would say is um, we have parents at our organization across the political spectrum. So, unfortunately, education has become a very political issue, and parents who want non-ideological, academically excellent schools now get labeled as far right or right wing. But I talk to parents all the time who consider themselves traditional Democrats or even progressives that might have different views on things like healthcare or student loan funding, or even some other cultural issues that say um, teaching that there are two sexes is not controversial and not political, or teaching that you shouldn't be judged by the color of your skin is not political and not controversial. And so these ideas that were taught in most schools and were culturally normal, and these are 80-20 issues still today. Just going back to that and going back to this idea of how do we get students reading, writing, and doing math on grade level again? And the nation's report card scores are terrible. Ward, you mentioned the scores are terrible. I think it'd be one thing to be having this conversation about these ideas being presented in school and every kid could read. We're like, well, maybe it is, maybe something's going on here where every kid could read at least, but at least they're, but no, it's like, okay, this obviously is not working in terms of, if the goal is to get every student to an academically excellent place or raise them up academically according to their ability. Um, and so you just look at where do you want education to be and what do you think is the purpose of schools? There are some people that think that the purpose of schools is to mold students and kids into a particular worldview. And that's not the argument that we see that parents want, and that's not the position of our organization.
Well, I think that you also, I remember when I started teaching, you couldn't, we were told very clearly to not be political, to not bring our political biases or opinions into the classroom. And so, um, you know, I guess this is another way in which sometimes have changed. When you, we've had some districts here who have had some um, school board members who've had a great deal of challenge when it comes to passing curriculum. But one of the things that they dealt with was teachers saying, well, you don't have the expertise for this curriculum. We're bringing a curriculum that we recommend. What you need to do is just to accept that. And so I'm going to let you answer that. Well, I'm going to have to take a moment just off screen, and then I'll be back shortly.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question about curriculum. And, this is where my organization would argue, obviously local is the best place to make these decisions. And so we at Defending Education don't think we have the recipe for success for, school district in Southern Florida and a school district in South Dakota and a school district in San Francisco, California. We do truly think that education decisions are best made by the local community, by the parents, by the teachers, by other education stakeholders. And so, um, it depends, I guess, on what the community wants. Although I will say, looking at the states specifically that are doing the best, they have a very strict curriculum and educational goals that they have on their schools, and the schools that stick to the curriculum that's approved have the best results. And so I guess it's up to the community to decide, like, what do you want for your children? And maybe we should look for teachers in our school district that are comfortable teaching to the curriculum that's provided, or what are some of the success metrics that we have, and how do we get there? And we would argue it should be around academic excellence.
The next question that I have for you is, you spoke about how textbooks seem to be the obvious place in which school board members look, or they're listed on the website. I think you talked about that. But they're also used, you pointed out, there are other avenues by which some controversial things can come into play, and that perhaps parents don't know about that when you talk about faculty development opportunities and things like that. What is the way in which, other than asking general questions, like if you're a school board member, how would you find out that kind of information?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing I'd encourage parents to do is check the backpack, is what I always say, which really now means like check your kids' online homework assignment software, Google Classroom and all these things. Look over your kid's shoulder at their assignments, and look at what they're bringing home for homework if they're getting homework, and start there. And then, attend school board meetings. There's a lot of interesting things that are discussed at school board meetings. And so you might find about something there. If you're a little bit more savvy of a parent, you can ask, your principal, or, your dean of students, or your instructional lead at your school, under the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, which is a federal law. Parents have the right to examine curriculum at any K-12 public school. And so again, it's federal law that the school has to let you examine the curriculum. Now, they could tell you you have to come in person during lunchtime on a Thursday, and you can't take pictures. A lot of schools make parents jump through hoops just to read the textbook that their kids are learning from, unfortunately. But they do have to let you do that. And so, but some schools are also great, and they say, yeah, come in anytime. We'd love for you to take a look at this. We'd be happy to walk you through it. Don't assume that they're going to try to block you from seeing things. A lot of schools are very accommodating, and sometimes it might just take an email to the principal to do so. I'd also say, again, for the more savvy parent or community member, there are public records laws in all 50 states. And so if you feel like you're not getting what you want, you can make an official request under your state's essentially sunshine law, public records law, and say, I want to see this, textbook, or this curriculum, or this worksheet that was given, or something like that. And by law, they have to provide it to you with reasonable accommodations.
Exactly. Well, also, there's, as some in our audience have pointed out, there are quite a few organizations that have organized, parent organizations, moms organizations, that are out there that parents can contact and can get involved with if you'd like to find out a little bit more about that. For school board members themselves, having those conversations with community members and having conversations with parents. and just checking out, hey, are you satisfied with what you're seeing, with what your children are learning, and then being able to go from there and then ask some very informed questions at your school board meeting.
Well, and Tracy, you and I were at the same event last month,
Mhm.
where somebody was talking about, as a school board member, you can go into a classroom and
Yeah.
just observe. And so for school board members, I love that idea of just, especially, I think it builds trust with teachers too, of, I want to see what's going on in your classroom so I can advocate for you and I can advocate for the students and I can advocate for our classrooms. And so I think that was a really interesting idea too, to really see what's going on and to be the most informed board member you can be.
Here in Kansas, we have a few restrictions, and there are some schools that are very open about that. We've heard, Ward and I have talked with teachers in different districts, and the teachers love to have school board members come and observe their classroom. It really shows them, hey, this is what we're doing. They get excited about it. They see that reflective in the school board meetings, that teachers are very excited to talk about what they're doing. They love showing off all the great things that they're doing in their classrooms. So we certainly would advocate for that. If you're a school board member, check with your district to find out if there's some restrictions. As a school board member, I mean, you should know those as to whether you're allowed to go in there unaided or whether you need to make some kind of an appointment. But I think that's one of the best ways is to be able to go in and to see kind of what's going on in the school that you are supporting. We do have another question that is asked about copyright laws. As far as taking pictures of textbooks or curriculum, there are some who say, well, that violates copyright laws, but that really, I'll let you talk about that, Paul. Do you have anything you'd like to bring to bear on that?
Yeah, no, this is super frustrating. This is a great question. We get all the time from parents, and we unfortunately see this a lot from school districts as well. So just for everybody else watching, the issue is sometimes when a parent or some other citizen or education stakeholder wants to view the curriculum, the school board will say, or the school district or the principal or whoever superintendent will say, you cannot view this material because it's copyrighted material. And that's where most parents like give up. They're like, oh, well, it's copyright, so I can't look at it. But that's really not legitimate because, copyright is so you don't take it and like resell it and make money off of their ideas. Um, the school district has purchased this to deploy to students, and parents have the right to see it. And so, again, you can push back under the Protection of People Rights Amendments. You can say things like, I'm not going to sell this information. Um, if a school district says you can't take pictures, that might be something that the, you have to determine whether you want to fight back on that or not. I think if you're able to go view the curriculum, and just flip through it, and if you find something concerning, then maybe address that. So, there's some things that you maybe have to give or take on the picture taking thing, but the school district shouldn't be telling you that you can't view what your children are learning based on copyright material. And there's a lot of like, lawsuits and litigation efforts to try to remedy that. Also, I don't know if it's a federal bill or some state level legislation that's been passed to try to remedy that as well. So it's certainly an area of concern. If anybody knows that that has happened in their school district, we'd love to hear about that. We'd love to help remedy that situation. But that is a concern. That is a speed bump that parents and community members are facing.
Oh, if anybody has in Kansas has any questions about that, we also can provide some information on that as far as let you be aware of the the state statute that covers that as far as schools are concerned. So happy to do that. Well, our time is closed here. We only have about a minute left. Anything else that you would like to say, Ward, before we sign off?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Paul, thank you so very much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to provide the transparency for district leaders and school board members to who need to understand the agenda and the Southern Poverty Law Center curriculum and faculty development programs so that they can make the decisions that's best for their districts. So we thank you for joining us today. And for those of you who are still in our audience, want to let you know to mark your calendars for Friday, August 28th at noon. And we will host our next webinar with Jonathan Vogel, attorney from the Vogel PLLC, a former Deputy General Counsel of the U.S. Department of Education and a former civil rights attorney with U.S. Department of Justice, who discuss the role and responsibilities specifically of the board attorney and board members. And as always, if you have a topic that's of interest to you, please let us know. We'd be happy to host a presenter to help you to understand that topic better and understand how it affects your school district better. We again thank you, Paul, for joining us today, and hope everybody has a really great rest of your week and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much. Take care.